women who are 53 and older, specifically 53, 55, 57, 59, 60, modernized female whores.
I'm really a whore.
Come on, baby.
You don't want an old man because he can't perform in bed. Or they're not looking for 55 or 57-year-old women. But most of the men who do all of the stuff that you're wanting are dead. Some of you have arthritis. Some of you have missing teeth. You have gray hair. You have grandkids. I am the table. Like, you got to be realistic and balanced in your thinking.
So another dating coach decides to give up on Black women. And before I get into why, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll get into it.
Women who are over 50 years old who have been reaching out to me for wife coaching tips, I'm no longer taking them. Don't pay the money through my website because I'm just going to refund it to you. I've had a couple of experiences this week, and here's why.
Okay, my first thought is, why do you need wife coaching tips in your 50s? Look, I understand there are many of us who didn't grow up in households, maybe where you didn't see your parents getting together along. Maybe you didn't have two parents. Maybe you were just growing up with your mom and your father. So I understand that there are those who just have no understanding of what it means to be a wife. But the fact that this is like a trend is the problem. Like, it's one thing if you have these anomaly cases here or there of really broken families, but it's another thing when this is a consistent trend, when it is normal to have women in their 50s who are taking wife coaching tips. Ideally, these are the women who will be teaching younger women in their teens, coming of age in their 20s, how to be a wife. So the very fact that there is a market of older, mature women who are still needing to learn the basics of how to manage their family, in my opinion, is part of the problem. And this goes down to a lot of the issues that we see today that impact the Black community, especially Black women. We are not taught how to value marriage. We are not taught how to value family values. We are taught to value getting our career, going and getting the bag, going and getting degrees, all the things that don't really lead to a successful relationship, the things that have nothing to do with learning how to raise a family. And so you have these women who go off and they focus so much on the careers and they may get these degrees, but they have they have zero interpersonal skills. They don't know how to get along with a man, let alone how to be married, let alone how to raise kids, all that kind of different stuff. And so they spend so many years just completely unprepared. And again, God forbid you have kids in that time when you're unprepared. God forbid you bring in children in the world when you're not with another man, when you're not in a family marriage setup. That creates a whole bunch of different chaos. And then now when you're in your 50s, when you're in the age where ideally you should be mentoring women half your age, you're now competing with them. And it just really complicates things. So to me, like, the first thought is, why do you have a large percentage of women in their 50s who need to take wife coaching tips? To me, that already shows red flag. There is a big problem in this setup.
Most of you, not all, but 99% of the women who are 53 and older, specifically 53, 55, 57, 59, 61, 64, in those age brackets, have been the most challenging for me to coach because the standards are unrealistically high.
So here's another problem. Not only do these lovely mature women now in their 50s, they weren't set up, they weren't taught how to be a wife, they weren't taught what it means to maintain a marriage, so they're now having to learn this in their 50s. On top of that, they have all these unrealistic expectations, and this is compounded probably with the amount of success they've had, with the amount of baggage, past relationships, maybe baby daddies, movies they've seen, careers, degrees if they have any. So it just gets even more complicated the older you get, because the older you get, it's like you have less stuff you want to put up with, you have less negotiating you want to do. Usually you have an idea of what you like, and so now there's these high expectations coupled with an inability to know how to actually manage a marriage, and that just makes it really, really difficult for those ladies. So I could see how this is already making it very difficult for these ladies to win.
I get that you're old school, and I get that your mom raised you to only interact with gentlemen, but most of the
it's like, okay, if your mom only taught you to interact with gentlemen, did your mom teach you how to be a wife? It doesn't sound like it, because the very fact that these women have to take life coaching, marriage coaching tips, sounds like there was some training that was missed. But let's continue.
men who do all of the stuff that you're wanting are dead, or they're not looking for 55 or 57-year-old women. There are some younger men who do that, and you don't want an old man because he can't perform in bed. Well, the younger men don't want an older woman because some of you have arthritis. Some of you.
What she literally said, the men who can do what you want are dead. Or they don't want you. They want women half your age. You want men who can perform sexually, but those men don't want you because you can't perform sexually. So, oh goodness. Okay, let's continue.
You have missing teeth. You have gray hair. You have grandkids. Like, you got to be.
You have grandkids. Okay, so remember what I said before? If you spent all those years not knowing how to be a wife, but you brought kids and then now grandkids into the whole scenario, what did you teach your daughters? What did you teach your sons? If you now in your 50s are taking wife coaching classes, but you had all those years not knowing how to be a wife, not knowing how to actually manage a family, then what did you teach those kids? What values did you instill into your daughters and to your sons? And this is precisely the problem. This is why I think you do have women out there who feel that it is okay to get knocked up, to have a kid out of wedlock, but that's not a big deal. It's no big deal to just create a baby with a man that you may not want to spend the rest of your life with. But when it comes to now settling down and getting married, oh, that's a big deal. It's like you got to go through all these hoops. But you can create a baby with a man that you don't know is going to be there forever. But when it comes to now actually ensuring that you have the environment necessary for that baby to be raised in the best way possible, now you know how to do it. And that's the problem. The values, the things that women have been told to value in this modern society, valuing careers, valuing money, valuing success, valuing college, at the expense of relationships and marriage. These women who are going for the careers are still having sex and still having babies, just now outside of the confines of marriage. And that's creating a whole lot of havoc. And again, what does it create? Kids who now don't know how to value marriage, who don't know what to look for, who don't know what a healthy family structure looks like. And then it creates broken homes, and then the cycle continues. We all know the results of single parent households, especially single mother ran households. They're not good. Let's continue.
Realistic and balanced in your thinking. So listen, the other thing is these social media dating sites, or whatever you call these things, I've seen modernized female whores in those sites, meeting strange men, having sex with them. You don't know them. And I'm talking about women of God. I'm really a whore.
God on my side.
We have got to stop this. We have got to stop the I'm a woman of God, I pray, I love the Lord Jesus Christ, and then you were thoughting it up in the strip club the night before church, the day after church, going on OnlyFans, sleeping with a whole bunch of different men, getting knocked up, getting pregnant, calling yourself a whore, but God still loves you. Like, yeah, God loves you for who you are, for who he created you to be, but he will never condone sin. He will never condone the very behavior that will actually harm you. So that's one thing I don't like. He's going to be calling yourself a woman of God and you were going around there acting like a prostitute. Yes, Jesus walked with prostitutes and sinners, and he walked with the thieves, and he walked with the outcasts of the world, and he also said, go and sin no more. He was not coming into agreement with their lifestyles. He was trying to empower them and show them a better way of living. Let's continue.
You've got to make some shifts and some changes in how you think and how you process if you want to be married. Now, if you just want to be somebody's jump off and you just want to be somebody's cougar, or some.
I guess there's more to that video, but I've seen enough. At the end of the day, you know, I'm not in my 50s, so I don't want to sit here and pretend like I understand the full struggle, but it is safe to say that women who are in their 50s and who are just now learning what it means to be a wife, there's going to be a lot that they have to unpack, and there's probably going to have to be a lot of humbling that they're going to have to do. I had the opportunity to talk to a lovely lady. Shout out to TJ Randolph. We had an interview months ago, and she talked about how she got married for her first time in her 50s, but what she had to do was humble herself because she had all these previous situations, she had all these expectations, she had all this baggage, and in order for her to find a husband that was a right fit for her with where she was at in life, she had to humble herself and she had to be more realistic. And so at the end of the day, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like you still can find love. I firmly believe that people can find love wherever they're at. They just have to be realistic with what they offer, what they are bringing, and then what is actually going on out there. And I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up. Hopefully you don't put yourself in a situation where you're in your 50s and you're getting into your golden years, just now learning how to do things that are quite basic and foundational to being a woman. Hopefully that is something that you learn early on. And if it's not, okay, that's where you're at. But ideally for younger women out there, no one understand that these are values and these are things that you should be learning coming up. And if you're not, there are still opportunity out there to learn how to be a wife. There's opportunity out there to learn what it means to raise a family, what it means to work together with a man. It's still possible to learn at any age, but ideally, the sooner you learn, the better. Don't put it off. You don't have to sacrifice your relationship for your career. You can absolutely do both at the same time. That I would actually argue that most women are going to be a lot happier and more fulfilled if they have their relationships in place and in order. So don't put that stuff off. Don't put off until your 50s and 60s about to retire learning how to be a wife. Learn that as soon as possible, because the longer you wait, the harder it's probably going to be. And quite frankly, I don't think that's how God intended it to be. Especially if you plan on having a kid, then it's best that you learn those skills so that you can have a kid within the context of a marriage, so you got to deal with all the other isms that come with co-parenting and child support and just all of that drama. Anyways, those are my thoughts. That's my perspective. What do you think? Do you agree or do you disagree? Let me know. Leave your questions, comments, concerns in the comment section below. Thank you so much for listening if you've gotten this far, and we'll talk later. Bye. All right, everybody. Hey. Let me turn that off. What's going on? Happy Tuesday. What's going on? It says keyword realistic. That word may as well be ancient. Oh, you guys are making me laugh already. If you guys are joining in, like, share, subscribe on the way in. I have been meaning to follow up with this topic for the last few days. I did a live last week where I reviewed an interview that an ex-feminist did. She's also a professor, to my understanding, with another content creator that got a lot of traction, and it was super interesting, but I had to cut it off halfway through because I had some meetings I needed to go to. But I have been meaning to follow up, and so today we are going to do part 2 of the interview with the ex-feminist, or I'm just going to be reacting to the interview she did with somebody else. Now, for context, I wanted to share a video I did about a year ago where it was a dating coach. She was basically talking about the challenges that she had or was having with different women, particularly those who were 50 and up. And I thought that was relevant because I want you guys to understand these are the ladies that actually should be teaching my generation or younger generations. And she's talking about she's having a consistent amount of women in her 50s going in there, having wives, looking for wife coaching in their 50s plus, and having super unrealistic expectations. And so when we understand that this is the mentality that's going on, that this is what the elders of the community or the soon-to-be elders are struggling with, then we understand now why there's so many young women who don't know what they're doing, who have zero understanding of what it means to be a wife, because their, parents, grandparents didn't pass that on because they don't know how to do it. And so this interview, we're going to look a little bit more into it. This lady, she shares some of the programming that she experienced. And what I really appreciate about what I've heard up to this point is that she's actually been very candid about how it destroyed her life or how it negatively impacted her life. So that's what we're going to look at today. What's going on, Dr. T-san? Always good to see you. That's always good to see you. What's going on? Inspired by Truth. Yes. So we're going to review this, and then you guys, I actually did reach out to this lady. I'm going to show you guys specifically, and I'm planning on having her on my podcast myself within the next week or so. And so I wanted to review this to kind of give you guys just a sense of the topic, but I'm planning on having her directly on my podcast, and I'm going to ask her some specific questions that I think they're a little bit more relevant to our audience. And so I'm excited about that. If any of you guys have questions you would like to send over to me, or if you have questions or things that you would like me to ask her, feel free to do so, or you can just tune in live when I interview her. I'm going to schedule that soon. And you can engage in the conversation. I think it should be really insightful. So without further ado, let's listen to what she has to say. If you guys missed the first part, you can go back. I live streamed it last week. If you guys want to get like the first part that I covered off, I'm just going to jump in right where I stopped, and we'll go from there. Okay.
That we are all families that live in this place, and we collectively want to create a really nice place for us to thrive in, and in essence, that is the kind of place that I grew up in.
Well, I'm certainly no feminist scholar, and I don't know I don't know that much about feminist history, honestly. When I was younger, it was more in vogue to be a feminist, and now it's not. And when it was I was kind of turned off by the harshness of what I perceived in it. This is coming. One of the things I think, like when we're talking about the post-industrial revolution timeline, we're talking about these radical social changes that are happening along sort of a moving river, lots of currents moving in and out. And so I try to resist the thought that it used to be like this, instead of just thinking like at this time it was like this, and then at this time it was like this. And so there's all these emergent qualities that are shaping the way people experience their societies, their families, themselves, their identity throughout this sort of modern era. And I have a sense that at some point there were good things that were done in the name of feminism in order to give women certain legal statuses and rights as people. And that I'm not really sure of a solid opinion on something like no fault divorce. To some extent, I think that it's a useful thing, because I've been in a relationship where I was being physically abused as well as being cheated on. And in this case, a lot of the things that happen in a relationship where there's domestic abuse are sort of subtle. It's kind of hard to build a case, and nobody's witnessing these things. It's he said, she said. And by the time you're in a relationship that's really contentious, both people are not being their best self. Both people are at times saying and doing things that somebody outside of the relationship would go, you guys are a mess, so there can be a lot of difficulty in, even if you were to bring all of this before, say, a impartial third party, getting them to say, okay, this is clearly out of line. You've got denial of charges, you've got whatever. So it becomes very messy if you were to have to prove that. And people in really bad relationships having the opportunity to say, I don't have to justify my reasons for leaving this. I want a chance at something better, where maybe even being alone is better than what I'm experiencing here. So I'm going to just take that chance. I'm not ready to throw that ideal away. But what's interesting to me, sort of this thread that's running through my thoughts as I'm reflecting on the things that you're saying, is this kind of the freedom that people have gained throughout this modern era has left us sort of seeking and expecting that we can perfect things, that we can reach something better. So like thinking about your mother and her saying to you, don't have kids, don't do what I did. She's wanting something for you that's better than her perception of what her life was like. And then
she did tell me. So she did tell me that she realized that my life was actually much harder than hers.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So
she actually did have it better.
I want to hear about that. But I also want to, reflect, like, these men who aren't interested in seeing a young woman again after one physical encounter. They're thinking, what are they thinking? Is it quantity? Is it quality? Is it like, maybe I would find someone who's a better mate for me? I met this woman. No, she's not quite what I'm looking for, so I'm not interested in more. But if I meet somebody who really knocks my socks off, then I might. But as long as you have the sense that there's something better out there, and then you keep striving for it. It's like, and then a lot of the, I guess I shouldn't say a lot, but several of the women that I've spoken with in the course of these dialogues over the past, I guess, year or so, who've talked about their experience of not ever becoming mothers, have said, I didn't want to do to someone what I felt was done to me.
So, okay, real quick. There's some more I'm going to unpack there, but for those of you guys who are hopping on right now, I am doing a part 2 of a live of an ex-feminist who, to my understanding, is a professor still out in New York. I need to confirm, but anyways, nevertheless, she was a feminist, active feminist, and now considers herself ex-feminist. In this interview, she breaks down how feminism really negatively impacted her life and actually the life of people that she knows. So that's what we're looking at. What was really interesting, and that was a rather long snippet, but we're kind of catching up to the point that we ended on our last stream. What's interesting is the woman here that's being interviewed, Darleen Lev, I think her name is, goes on to talk about how her mother had multiple kids and basically encouraged her that she didn't want her to have the life that she had. She wanted her to go and pursue her dreams and pretty much live the feminist, fantasy. And now, as a, older woman who really fashioned her life off of that and does not have children, her mom, who was the one that tried to push her living out this feminist fantasy, now can look at her life and say, actually, your life was harder. Your life as a feminist, your life as a modern woman was actually harder than my life as a more traditional woman. And she goes on to explain that. I thought that was really interesting. But let's hear what else she has to say.
I felt like I was going to perpetuate something that I think was undesirable in my own family or my own behavioral patterns, or I didn't think that I was good enough to be somebody's mother. And so I thought that I should just stop this process with myself. Like, I will just not go on to do this to another generation. And so there's always that thought that there's some perfect way to be a person, a family, a parent, a partner, and that we shouldn't try if we can't be perfect. So
that's actually really interesting too, because now, granted, I wasn't there in my grandparents' generation or even my parents' generation, so I can't say for sure. But this idea of I'm not going to have kids because I don't think I'm going to be a good enough mother or father, I definitely do feel like it's more of a modern concept, because people for thousands of years have just been having kids without the conception of whether or not they were ready for it, without the idea of whether or not they even really needed it or wanted it. People just had kids. People got together, got married. You're supposed to have kids within the first few years. And so I wonder where this mindset of, well, am I really good enough for it? Am I really ready for it? Am I where this idea of choice, or where this idea of even whether or not you are qualified or not qualified, where that came from? Is it the proliferation of psychology and therapy, which is, I think, becoming a lot more prevalent or acceptable among women, at least. I don't know if it's as acceptable among men, but I think modern women are very much okay with therapy. So I don't know if it's that, but this idea of, am I even good enough to be a mom or a parent or whatever? I don't think that's a question that our previous generation struggled with. You guys let me know what you think in the comment section. Maybe I'm wrong, but I never heard my nana or any of my previous ancestors talk about whether or not they questioned whether or not they were even ready to have kids. They just had kids. It's just what she did. You know what I mean? So, okay, so let's continue.
I don't know. I'll let you pick up from there. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's also like the I wasn't ready, or I wouldn't have been ready to have children. And you have to ask yourself, what does that even mean?
When would you ever be? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that the hyper hormonal craziness of adolescence is designed exactly to get us into that situation and launch us into adulthood. It's jumping into having children, and it makes you ready. And I think we have certainly, and we can look to the pill for that, left the idea that life is actually something that happens to you. You don't really have complete control over it, but we have been given that illusion. And then also we have been given, or been sort of convinced into thinking that the domestic abuser or the marriage that isn't working. And how do we even define that? That's the other thing. I think that the definition has just gotten too close to cutting and running and not even trying. And
real quick, she mentioned something that I thought was interesting. She was like, our biology alone causes her to believe that you become ready in the process. And if we think about it, for how many thousands of years of human history have people been having kids early, in their teens, 20s? Like, for how many thousands of years? It's been happening since the beginning of time. right? I mean, you had some cultures, as soon as a woman started her, her cycle, she was considered a woman, or she was available to basically go off and create her own family. And so even our conception of what it means to be ready and what it means to have the tools necessary to raise a family is very different than other cultures. The timing associated with that, what defines an adult versus a child, like even our concepts around that in the West are very, very distinctive and not necessarily in alignment with the majority of human history. So it's really interesting that she called that out. Real quick, he says a recent CDC study that for the first time in US history, more women over 40 are having more babies than teenagers. My guess is women don't want to grow old alone. Cats, dogs, and our kids after 40 now. Really interesting. Thank you for that. Also, thank you for being a loyal member. I really appreciate it. More to come on that. I'm curious what percentage of those kids are being had within a relationship, outside of a relationship, what percentage of them are, being had within the context of marriage, which percentage of them are IVF? Because I do know that there is there's a trend of single mothers by choice, IVF. I don't know the percentage of that, but I've covered that off on my channel a little bit, where you're seeing women who hit a certain age and then they don't have the man that they want, but they are not willing to give up their desire to have a child. And so they do, artificial insemination. They go through the sperm bank. I'm seeing more and more of that. So I probably should look into that. If you have research on that, or if you've seen things, feel free to email it to me, because I'm curious. But my initial thought is, how many of those babies are being had within the context of a stable relationship, a marriage, versus how many of those are being had artificial insemination, sperm donors? What is that trend looking like? Really interesting. Shout out to you with the 5. It says, I enjoy your perspectives, just showing some support. Thank you so very, very much, you guys. Like, share, subscribe. Also, if you like what I'm doing here, you enjoy my content, feel free to show support. And thank you so much for the super chat. Okay, so let's continue. Just wanted to back on the money. Back on the money. Okay, let's continue. Right. Let's see what we got. Okay.
Anymore to make it work or see your way through something. And even just recently in my own life, going through a really, really hard time, and I'm trying to figure out how I can get out of this. And and then we somehow made our way through it. And everyone around me is saying, oh yeah, he's like this, you need to get out of there. So that's the other thing. More encouragement on behalf of friends to get out. Another anecdote I can provide, just of this idea of what things are supposed to be like versus the way they really truly are. Years and years ago, a friend, coworker, had a baby. Husband is launching a restaurant. He's working day and night. And she says to me, I'm like a single mother. He's never here. But he was working so that she could stay home with the kid. And he was working very hard. And he was faithful to her.
Okay, y'all hear that? Context. A wife married to a man. She has a child. He's opening up a restaurant, which I have worked in the hospitality industry for years. I'm very familiar with it. I'm no longer in it now, but just very familiar with the space. And if you are actively working in a restaurant, if you are a chef, if you're a restaurant, or if you are a chef, or if you're a manager, or if you are whatever, like restaurants, that is a all encompassing business. That is almost 24/7. It is a very demanding business. It can be very fruitful. It can be very I'm sure prosperous and fulfilling if that is a passion of yours, but it requires a lot of work. So you have a woman who has a man who is in a very demanding industry, but trying to provide a household, trying to provide a kind of lifestyle to where she can actually be there with the children, putting on a lot of hours. And, instead of there being an understanding of that or a sense of gratitude, she is upset that he's not able to be there more. So that's the context of what she's describing. Really, really, really interesting when you understand he's trying to make sure that she can be home with the child, and somebody has to work to do that. Okay, let's continue.
And I said, he's a man. He doesn't feel exactly the same way you do about the baby. He's actually doing a lot to give you the time with the baby. And, and to me, this is also kind of like a fantasy. She's going to the park, pushing the stroller up and down. She knows everybody in the neighborhood, and I'm trailing along and nobody's paying any attention to me. I don't matter to these women because I don't have a baby. And she told me later that I for all intents and purposes, saved her marriage, that every one of her friends was telling her to get out of this situation. If you think about it, here's a man working very hard to pay for everything so that she has the time with their child, and she's got it into her head that he's not doing enough because he's not doing what she can see in her own domestic sphere, but he's out there doing a lot.
Did y'all catch that? She sat there and said, she's talking anecdotally about her experience, right? Now, as a woman surrounded by other women who have children, she admits that she's being judged. Whether or not it's being said, whether or not it is explicit, she's talking about how she's invisible. People are not necessarily, she's not in the in crowd with the moms, right? There's a social stigma associated with being at her age or just being a woman without having children. She's admitting this. Now she's talking to a friend of hers who is a stay-at-home mom, who is raising a child, who has a husband who is literally paying all the financial bills and sacrificing so that she can stay at home and be a wife. And she's complaining, thinking that there's a better option. This is literally what she's describing. And this stay-at-home mother, who has a husband who is faithful to her, who is working to basically ensure that she can stay home with the child, she is unsatisfied because he's not showing up the way that she is. That's what she's talking about. And this, stay-at-home mother, housewife, is talking to other friends who are telling her, oh, you're getting, this isn't good. You should leave. You could do better than that. Trying to encourage her to leave a situation where literally she's being taken care of so she can focus on the child. They're trying to encourage her to leave that to now be a single mother, where not only she wouldn't be able to be home, she would actually have to be working like her husband was or ex-husband was if she did that in order to take care of that child. They're putting a sense of discontent in her, trying to convince her that her husband isn't doing his part. And she goes on to say, it was her. She was like, it was her that tried to give her a different perspective and say, hey, maybe your husband, he's not showing up in the way that you want him to show up. But can you understand that he's still doing his part? He's still doing his part. And here's the thing about it too. I understand just because somebody pays the bills, right? Like there's still a level of emotional vulnerability. There's still a level of connection that women want and have and need in relationships and vice versa. That is there. But I think what she's trying to allude to is that we have to be realistic about what's going on. Instead of us being so quick to not only judge, but assume that the men are not showing up the way that they need to, can we understand that just because the roles are different doesn't necessarily mean that it is any less valuable? And can we extend grace? If you see that there's somebody there, if you see your husband is there is working to try to provide a lifestyle for you to be with the children, maybe you want him to connect with you emotionally. Maybe you want to do that. Okay, you can work through that. And if he's genuinely doing it from a place of love, that's something that you can cultivate. But that's not a reason to just throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, oh, well, you're not being there emotionally for me because you're working to pay these bills to make sure that I can be here. I'm better off now just being a single mother. Like, no, that's insane. And also, I think this is the crazy thing about it too, because we live in a society right now where you have women now who are saying, okay, if he don't have enough money, I'm not even going on the date with him, which is another crazy thing to me. Y'all notice how as the economy gets harder, as it becomes more and more difficult for people to have a comfortable life, we don't see women lessening their dating standards or becoming more realistic. We see a lot of ladies going on and doubling down on their standards. You see ladies being like, oh, now he definitely has to have 6 figures. I can't afford my bills. So if I'm to date somebody, he has to be able to afford my bills. It used to be he needs to make 100,000. Now he needs to make at least 150,000 and own a home. Like, I'm seeing ladies under these current conditions double down and be even more adamant about these financial requirements. But the thing about it is, men, they're not like superheroes. If a man is, especially particularly in this current economy, if the expectation is that, okay, he has to go and work and provide this comfortable enough lifestyle where they have a nice home and they have a nice car, and you don't have any of the financial burdens, and you know, the groceries, and you know, the diapers, and the food and the clothes, everything that's needed to take care of the child and yourself. You want your nails done, you want your hair done, you want the makeup done, you want the extra income so that you can also live relaxed, to go to Pilates if you want to, go to the gym, have vacations. Like, if you want that, and you put a requirement on your man to do that, you have to be realistic about the fact that he may not be emotionally available to you in the capacity that you want. There has to be a trade-off. Like, there has to be an understanding that men, they're not superheroes. They can't be 100% therapist, 100% psychologist, 100%, you know, pastor, 100% man of God, 100% thug when you want him. But then now he's his businessman. But now it's like, you have to understand that, like, they're still human beings too. And so I appreciate how she's trying to add a level of humanity here and be like, hey, let's also try to look at it from the man's perspective. It's not to say that he's 100% perfect. Men are 100% perfect, do no wrong, that they can't improve in certain capacities. We understand that. But we have to be realistic about what's going on. And there are also seasons, right? There are going to be seasons in marriage where, you know, maybe it seems like you're working more. Maybe there's seasons where it seems like, okay, there's a more emotional availability, but maybe the finances aren't where you want them to be. There's going to be seasons where you feel like he's sacrificing more, she's sacrificing more. Like, marriages go through seasons, but there has to be a level of like, you just have to be willing to have gratitude and also be realistic. And women who put these heavy financial requirements on their men, particularly now, have to know that that's going to come at an expense. How many rich women complain about the fact that their men are always busy on the phone? Oh, because there's a business call, he's not there for me, he's not this and that. So it's like, you have to choose a struggle. You have to choose a struggle. No man is going to be all things that you need him to be. He's not God. Leave that up to God. You know what I mean? Let your husband be your husband. So I thought that was really interesting that she mentioned here is a housewife who actually had the kind of lifestyle that she wishes that she had. And this housewife is unhappy because she thinks there's something better. She's getting caught up in an illusion of there's something better. And she's not able to actually respect, or she's not able to actually have gratitude for what's in front of her. Okay, let's continue.
You know, so I think that we have also been sort of, and I don't know, it's indoctrinated into thinking or expecting things that are just totally unrealistic. And, you know, I think we also use the domestic abuse thing. You know, yes, some relationships you absolutely have to get out of them. That's true. But I think we're using that as a basis for why at the slightest provocation you get out of there. Mm-hmm. And, you know, my own household was by no means perfect. Some not so good things went on there. And even with those things, if I think about growing up with just my mother, mm-hmm. I can't even begin to imagine it. My father died when I was 20. Mm-hmm. And he was sick with cancer throughout my late teens. And after he was gone, I saw just how weak and vulnerable my mother really was without him. I saw just how much my father really did contribute to a balanced household. Again, absolutely not perfect. She probably even had reasons to leave him. But if he had lived, I wonder, whether they would have stayed married. They probably would have. And hopefully we would have seen our family through, this, some of these things that went on. So, and I was the person who experienced the brunt of it. But I still wouldn't have wanted my parents to get divorced, and I wouldn't have wanted to break up my family. Yeah.
It's really interesting. She's talking about how, looking back at her own family, and she alludes to this earlier on in the interview. She's like, it wasn't like my parents were necessarily deeply, madly in love per se. There was definitely a sense of duty and obligation that bound them together more than it was just endless love. And there were definitely challenges. There were challenges that they obviously experienced that someone now, or particularly in this modern concept or this modern understanding of marriage, someone would look at that and be like, oh, get out of that. Like, you have legal grounds, you have moral grounds, you have emotional reasons to leave that. So she's going back and reflecting on the household that she grew up in. And she was like, even with some of the different challenges, I think them staying together still was a lot better than had my mom left and had she tried to do things on her own. And then she goes on to reflect how, in spite of some of the different challenges that her parents had, which every marriage has on some level, how vulnerable she was when her dad passed away and the position that put her in. So, very, 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 very interesting. Let's continue.
Well, it's
And
interesting.
actually, since he died,
Mhm.
we weren't a family anymore.
Oh, it really dissolved.
It really, it really dissolved the family,
Yeah.
and all like strangers to one another.
What was your mother's statement to you about your life being harder than hers? When was that
Well,
revelation or that thought?
Yeah, I mean, why would women give this up? So you know what my mother did most of the day? She was not a stellar housekeeper, and actually my interest in interior design and my obsession with cleanliness is because I couldn't stand how unkempt our house was. And I was always,
Oh, wow.
cleaning and moving things
That's
around to
big.
try to, create a sense of order there. But she was very creative. She was always making things. She sewed my clothes, all of our clothes, made quilts for us. And in most of the households on our block, the women did needlework, did wonderfully creative things.
Mhm.
And, if I think about the atmosphere on the block during the day, they were making things, socializing, creating a sense of community. And then you drive down that street, 40 years later, and all the windows are closed and the doors are locked, and it's a ghost town. And maybe you have a few random children coming home and unlocking the door alone. I mean, just think about the identity crisis with kids today. I would say it also can be traced back to this. Who am I? I'm living marooned in this place. Who are my neighbors? Maybe I don't know. I have friends who everybody has a different last name in the family. That's the other thing, right? Like the girls have the mother's last name and the boys have the father's last name. Like just not even the whole family having the same last name, right?
Really interesting. So she's reflecting on the difference between the community now that she's in, right? Versus how it was growing up or how it was when she was coming of age, talking about, okay, women were very creative. They were sewing, making things from scratch. She went on to talk about how her mother was actually not the best housekeeper, although she was a stay-at-home wife. The house wasn't particularly clean. And so the things that a stay-at-home wife might be assumed to do, she wasn't necessarily stellar at. But, she was making clothes and doing different creative things. And many of the women in her area, her block, were also very creative, doing things that they get together and have arguably, maybe sewing parties or knitting parties or pass on different designs and things. And how that's a lot different now when you go into the similar neighborhood and there's just people are just very, focused, atomized, or in their own space doing their own thing. You don't see that sense of community. People are just kind of trying to survive on their own, and how that sense of community has been lost. Something that I think is also worth noting as someone who's very much a creative, I understand to be creative or to be in a creative space, there has to be a sense of stability or freedom that you need to really do that. Like there's a level of stress that you can't be under in order to be creative. And I understand everyone's a little bit different, but generally speaking, creative people need a level of freedom, a level of peace, and they need to be free of a level of stress to really be able to flow in that space of creativity. So as she's describing these housewives who are basically, they're sewing, they're knitting, they're doing these different projects. In order to do that, there has to be a level of stress or certain burdens that they don't have on them. If you're just worried or concerned about paying bills, if you're worried or concerned about how I'm going to keep these light bills on or that water bill or whatever, it can really impede that. It can impede with that creative flow, with that creative expression. And so as she's describing is what she's alluding to without saying it directly is these women, even not to say they didn't have their own challenges, but there are certain burdens that they didn't have to deal with. They weren't dealing with the burdens of how am I going to pay these light bills? How am I going to pay this water? What's going on with the food? How am I going to keep this roof over their head? Like they weren't dealing with that stress. And so that gave them a level of resting in their femininity, if you will, that they could create and sew and do cute things and create outfits and create curtains and things. Like they could do that because they didn't have the burdens associated with trying to survive. That's the burden that they gave to their husband. Now we live in a different society now. We live in a different context where women have now been given the I guess, freedom to take on that burdens. But what I'm saying is that does impact creativity. It can even impact what some may call the feminine expression of creativity or the softness that comes with being able to do that. So really, really interesting. Okay, let's continue.
So yeah, it's like just the expectations are way too high. The idea of being ready is, and also we have been told or made to believe that we have to get out if he's bad. Never mind how bad she is. some of the mothers on the block were absolute terrors, and you could hear them shrieking at the house. Back then there wasn't air conditioning, right? You could hear,
Yeah, I'm seeing some stats on domestic violence that are actually not true. I'd covered this off not too long ago. And also, shout out to Dr. T-Son Johnson. He did a breakdown of this too. But when you look at domestic violence, like statistically, and you look at it nationally, and I understand there might be changes in certain areas or whatever, but by and large, domestic violence is bilateral. It is bilateral. And the majority of the time, it's actually being initiated by women. And to date, some of the most violent relationships, believe it or not, are actually woman-to-woman relationships, lesbians. I broke this down in detail in previous videos. You guys can go check it out. I provided the sources. But this idea that like men are going out and abusing women all the time, and that they are primarily the abusers is actually not true at all. It is, in most cases, it's bilateral, and then the women are the ones who are initiating across the board. In Black relationships, and in white communities, and Hispanic communities, women actually initiate violence towards men more. And there were different theories as to why. When I read the different study, there were different theories. Some were saying that sometimes women, they do it as a way to try to, do it as a way to try to, I don't know, minimize threat beforehand. Or I think there were some who were saying there might be less stigma associated with a woman hitting a man. Whereas men are generally socialized that hitting a woman is like horrible. Like no one wants to be considered a woman beater. Like no one wants to do that. And so there's less stigmas to a woman being violent versus a man being violent. There are different theories, but what the stats about domestic violence showed was that, DV relationships, when that happens, very oftentimes it's bilateral, meaning it's the men hitting the woman and the woman hitting the men. And then in most instances, the women do initiate. They're the first ones to throw the punch, or the first ones to throw the thing to whatever. And women are, like I said, lesbian relationships are actually the most violent. So I wanted to break that down because there's very much this idea that all women are being oppressed and it's only men throwing punches. And I'm like, that's just not what the stats show to be true. Now, perhaps, who knows, maybe back 50, 60 years ago, when women were socialized a lot different, they were conditioned to be a lot different. Maybe it could have been more of that. But even then, there's always been what some might consider henpecked men, or men who have been controlled by domineering women. That's always happened as well. Just as like there's always been situations where men were very dominating. So you see that aggression coming from both. Okay, let's continue. Okay.
Which house had a shrew in it and a henpecked husband? We don't really also talk about that. So you end up alone with the kids to get away from the bad man. But what about the mom who's overwhelmed, overworked? And this, I think, is where, if we're telling this story and it has an arc, where we might get people a few generations removed from mine who say, I don't want to do that to someone else, because I grew up with a single mother who was completely overworked and miserable.
Yeah.
And my dad was absent, or I saw him only. So why would I do that to someone? And yet this freedom to get out of something that is bad is supposed to be a solution, but it actually created a much bigger problem.
Yeah. I really admire that you're discussing these things the way, with this openness. I think that, I hope that people who listen to this conversation will be kind in their responses, because these things are so touchy to talk about. These things are so hard for people to discuss. You can't start discussing women and men without tripping over lots of people's feelings and legitimate caveats and, their own life experiences. So I find it to be such a sensitive area to wade into on any level of public discussion. And so what you usually end up seeing are these really big sweeping stereotypes and inflammatory statements. But what you're describing, I mean, these are trends that you've noticed over the course of your life and how they've shaped your perception of your world, the world that we live in and what's been going on. And I think that there's so many, I don't know, I hesitate to lay any blame on women or on men for some of these things. I think that it's emergent between us. I think we're so interconnected that, like, take one area that a lot of people would agree is dysfunctional, and that's prostitution. That, sex work in general, pornography, prostitution. There's a lot of dysfunction around this, a lot of disagreement, a lot of controversy, but at heart, it's an exploitation of men's sexuality using women's sexuality. And it's also an exploitation of women's sexuality using men's sexuality. There's sort of a complementary loop that's happening where people are exploiting one another. And I think that a lot of these interactions that you're describing, being able to leave more easily, what that does to him, what that does to her, and how it impacts him and how it impacts her.
What's so interesting on a quick side note, even on prostitution, I don't know numbers on the stats on this. If you guys have anything, please feel free to share, because I'm always interested, particularly in reports or data analytics that can help inform my understanding. But, this idea, even that prostitution is something that men overwhelmingly engage in. I remember, I don't know if it was last year or a year prior or something, where Gambia, they basically passed a law that was trying to keep Western women, they said British women, I think in particular, from coming in and exploiting the men. Like, there is a huge tourism, Seggs tourism, that goes on in Gambia and Africa. And the primary beneficiaries of that, to my understanding, is old white women. And it's gotten to be so bad that they actually had to release like a law. Let me pull it up for a second. Passes law against, let me see. I want to bring this up real quick because, yeah, I remember running across this sometime last year, and I was like, wow, this is not what I would expect. But it was basically looking at, the amount of sex tourism, and particularly how it was actually exploiting men. And I even saw I saw one account covered off called "The British Grannies Preying on Gambian Men." And so, I mean, if you can look it up and you can see it, you'll see it in its details, but it's women who were going out there and exploiting young men. And now we have, this Stella got the groove back. It was kind of about touching with this idea. What's that other book? I can't even think about it, but it was a book that I covered off maybe a year or two ago when I was talking about the passport girls, and we're seeing this. I don't know if it's a growing trend or a trend that's been there for quite some time, of women going abroad and using their money and their resources to actually gain access to poorer men who they find sexually attractive. So I don't know that we can no longer say that this is something that men overwhelmingly do. I mean, they might still lead the trend, but I'm like, as the world, or at least as the West becomes more modern, and as women are given more options financially and more options just as far as their lifestyle on how to live and move, I wonder how that's actually also impacted prostitution, or impacted some of these things that were originally something that primarily men engaged in. Really curious on that. Okay. Yeah, okay, so you said Mombasa, Kenya has a ton of British, German women getting beach boys, many married, most 40 plus. When I was in Tanzania, I remember some of the locals telling me how the Maasai men specifically, how the Maasai men would be targeted by like Italian women. I don't know why, or how they would, this is a couple of locals being like, yeah, if you see an Italian woman here or whatever, like they kind of knew what time it is. Like they would come over and they would have these experiences with these men. Because you'll see, it's very common out there in Tanzania and Kenya and different places where you'll see people who are like, some of them who are actually still wearing their traditional garb. And some of it too is just straight tourism, or it's just a market. Like they know that when they see them in that traditional garb or whatever, like they will, sometimes people will pay for them to perform. Sometimes people will give them certain things or whatever. So some are like using it very much as like a money-making opportunity. But I remember being there, and when I was in Zanzibar specifically, I saw it was exclusively Maasai men. It wasn't the women. The women were still staying. They were, private back in their own villages doing their thing. But the men were out there. Some of them were engaged in industry, and some of them were out there engaging with European women. And the locals would be like, yeah, some of these guys will marry these women. They'll go to Europe. They're basically looking for a green card. So it's like, even the locals know what time it is. Even the locals know. Okay, let's continue.
There's kind of a balancing of the impact and the fault, ultimately, because one couldn't fall apart if they weren't vulnerable to falling apart. but they also couldn't fall apart if the other hadn't fallen apart. So it's such a precarious and delicate thing, this relationship between the sexes.
I think in one of the essays in the book, I just recently watched Love Story. You know that movie?
I don't know it.
With Ali McGraw and Ryan O'Neal. It was one of the most famous movies of 1970s. It's really interesting. If you watch movies from the 70s, just when there's this whole way of thinking is starting to turn, he is so madly in love with her. And frankly, her dialogue is a little abusive. And he finds it very charming. And I noticed in a lot of movies from around this period of time, there is so much love still shown between the men and the women as they're grappling with this new society. But as we have evolved, it really is like there's just more separation. So, you know, some years ago in a literature course that I taught, I did it on the theme of love. And I thought that they would be really interested in this. I certainly would have been myself, but they were incredibly cynical. And I gave them free license to, I gave them the feminist lens, even though I really don't want to deal with that. But I made very clear that they didn't have to agree with it. And I paired some Baudelaire poems with Black Venus by Angela Carter. And this is considered a very feminist story. And Black Venus, Jean Duval was Baudelaire's mistress. She was from the West Indies. And so there's all of this critical lens applied to his exotification of her and blah, blah, blah. But if you do a little research, you actually find out that he had a trust fund and she introduced him to laudanum and basically became an addict. And she had been a prostitute and somebody gave somebody syphilis and they both died of it. So yes, there's certainly some reciprocal exploitation going on. But I said, who would you rather have a beer with? In Black Venus, he's not doing enough for her. He's this, he's that. It's just bitching about him. And he's writing about how beautiful she is. And if she would only take him seriously.
Oh, okay. So I'm just now looking up Black Venus, y'all. That looks like this looks like a divestiture disaster. Let me see real quick. This is some feminist literature that is being promoted in school. Okay, Black Venus. It says, what is the synopsis? Oh, y'all, these divestiture disasters. Black Venus is a feminist study. Okay, yeah. So it looks like it's just a story about a Black woman who's over there thoughting it up with a French dude. This is, I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with this, but she is, yeah, okay. So Black Venus is a feminist study of the representation of Black women in the literary, cultural, and scientific imagination of 19th century French, employing psychoanalyst, feminist film theory, and the critical race theory articulated in the works of Frantz Fanon and Toni Morrison. Okay, now we understand what time it is. Venus Noir. Okay, now we see what time it is. So it looked like another divestiture disaster that ended up being feminist literature that is now being studied in college. Y'all. Okay, I just wanted to understand this. So that's what she's referencing. That is what she is referencing. I will say, I don't know what it is about Black feminism particularly that always seems like it is deeply connected with swirling. Deeply connected with swirling. I remember when I went to, I want to say it's called Mod, I think it is. It's this popular art museum in San Francisco. I think it was sometime last year I went. And both times, I've been twice now, both times I've gone, I have seen explicitly Black feminist representations of art. It's supposed to be, Mod is supposed to be a museum about, let me see what it's called. I want to see what it's called specifically, because my understanding is supposed to be basically representing, yeah, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. That's what it is. And it's supposed to represent, okay, yeah, the museum, sorry, MOAD, M-O-A-D. It's called the Museum of African Diaspora. So I've been there twice. It's called the Museum of the African Diaspora. I've been there twice in San Francisco. So it's supposed to basically represent the African experience across the diaspora. Both times I've been there, I have seen pretty much everything being portrayed from a Black feminist lens. Everything being portrayed from a Black feminist lens. That's the only representation that I've seen. And 100% of the time when I've seen like love themes, they were either queer or they're between a Black woman and a white man. Both times I've been. All of the love themes were either queer or we saw a Black woman with a white man. And I remember leaving and being like, first of all, this is not an expression of that African diaspora. Like this needs to be called the Black Feminist Museum, Art Museum. Like if it was renamed like the Museum of Black Feminism, I'd be like, okay. But don't call this the African diaspora and then the only thing you show is queer relationships and then a Black woman with a white man. Like that is not the African diaspora at all. That is actually an insult. But then secondly, I'm just like, why does Black feminism always seem to be like flirting with the idea of swirling? Like y'all are so against fighting the patriarchy, but you're over here trying to sleep with the white patriarch. Like I don't understand it, y'all. To this day, I do not understand it. But that's something that I noticed. And so it's interesting that she's referencing this Black feminist book. And now we see a Black woman with a white dude. I'm like, what is this? What is it about Black feminists that have this love relationship with white men when they're supposed to be fighting the patriarchy, but they're sleeping with him? That don't make no sense to me. Let's continue. I'm almost done here. I'm almost done here.
And, if she would only love him as much as he loves her. And in my sort of world, many of the men in my community love their wives, couldn't live without them. And so when we talk about the leaving, I think actually the men really are wounded by this. And I fell into the manosphere for a while. And just like, what Benjamin with all the detransitioners and the men whose wives just turned on a dime on them, and then they end up having to pay child support. And that's another reason why, men are hesitant to have children now and get married. This also happened to a relative of mine. He got married, and after she had a baby, she said, she came from a wealthy family. She said, now that I have my baby, I don't need you anymore. He was absolutely devastated by this. So, that's the other thing I would like to, a narrative got us here, let's say, and a narrative will get us out. I think men do love women. We have forgotten that. If I could quote one of my comments from my essay, one of the greatest tragedies of the feminist project is denying how much men have loved and cherished women and their work. It's women who decided that our work was not valuable anymore. It's women who actually decided that being a mother was a form of drudgery. But, any kind of hard work is a form of drudgery. I've been a professor for years, and nothing is more drudgery than grading essays. I would much rather be washing dishes and, frankly, changing diapers.
Y'all hear that? Y'all hear that? She said it was actually women who decided that the work that I had been doing was no longer valuable. It was women who decided that they wanted something better. They wanted something different. It was women who decided that they weren't happy and that they were being oppressed. And as someone who has actually lived the fullness of the feminist fantasy, the feminist ideals, she can look back and say, actually, I would have rather just been a traditional woman who was at home changing diapers and doing dishes. Like I would have rather that than being a professor who has the degree and has the career and has the status associated with it, who has to work and grind and grade papers. I would have rather be changing diapers and grading papers. I mean, this came out of her own mouth. And this is something you really don't hear a lot of. This is something you will not really hear ladies admit. And this is what I thought was so powerful about this interview. She was actually being very honest and very candid about the way in which feminism has completely sold a lie, at least, or at least not portrayed the full reality of what is going on. I thought that was fascinating. Okay, I'm almost done here.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can't help but think that there's truth in all of those perspectives. Both, I mean, I've been a young mother, stay-at-home mom, and I can remember the absolute anguish, the loneliness of that, just the complete loneliness. I can remember having two little kids, putting them in the stroller and walking around the neighborhood, just aching for someone to see, and just going to the store just so that I could talk for a moment at the cashier stand to someone who would be another face and voice in my life, show me that I was worth a smile. When you work long hours, day in, day out, 24 hours a day with little kids as your only companions, and they're difficult and needy and lovely, and they bring a lot of joy, but they also bring a lot of work, and there's little human connection outside of that service that you're doing for your
But
kids.
You didn't have that where you were living, like where there were other mothers.
No. I struggled to find that. It took me a long time to find that. And even then when I found, okay, this is my own story. So I know other people will have a different story, but I became a mom really young. I was 19 when I had my first and 21 when I had my second. And I tried to join a play group, and it was really, I was just treated like I was kind of a teen mom by all these women who were in their 30s having children, and not, I wasn't an equal really in that group. People's lives are just so individual, so these things are true. I can see that there's something that you lose in not getting to experience that. But there's something also that I understand, the desire that women and mothers would have to have something more outside of the motherhood experience in the home.
Okay, so they're coming from two different lenses, right? This is a woman who basically, again, I'm talking about, she's experienced the fullness or explored the fullness of the feminist ideology, being a modern woman and being pushed from her mother to not have kids, to really pursue everything feminism had to offer ladies. And then here's a woman who's saying, actually, look, I had kids young, and I could actually understand what it means to be a young mother and long for something more. So listen, the flesh is never satisfied. There's always, like I said, there's something in broken human nature that always is wishing for something more. And I think that's really why you have to be solid on what God has for you in that time, in that season. Because if you're not clear on that, then you're always going to be tempted to think that the grass is greener on the other side. There's always going to be something out there telling you that, oh, there's something better than what I'm living right now, even if what you are living is a blessing. This woman goes on to say she wished she was out, at home washing dishes and changing diapers. She would have rather had that lifestyle. But her mom said, oh man, I want, her mom was like, no, don't be out here changing diapers. Don't do that. Go pursue your dreams. And so here you are. These are different women who have very different experiences, talking about how at some level they weren't really content. And to me, that also shows what God talks about. The flesh is never satisfied. You're really only truly satisfied, I believe, when you are ultimately doing what God has called you to do and finding peace and contentment on that. Because there's always going to be something telling you that there's something better, even when there's really not.
So
but it's interesting because everybody's doing that at a different time in their lives. And that's what put you in, as that made you an outlier.
Right. Which kind of brings me back to my beef about education. I went, when I was in college, so this would have been in like maybe 2005 or 6. I went to a lecture by a guy, I can't remember the guy's name. He was an author. He wrote a book called The World Without Us. And this was, are you familiar with this?
James Kunstler. Yeah.
Okay. And I went to this lecture, and I was really steeped in the idea that we've overpopulated, humans are destroying the planet. And one of the things that he put forth in that lecture, one of his big pieces of hope, was that we can turn overpopulation around, and we know how to do it. We just have to focus on educating women. Because if you educate women, they will put off childbearing. And so there was this big, big push that this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to engineer a better world by making sure that women are attaining postgraduate degrees in greater numbers, that they're going at least through university, so that we can get them to stop having children so young. By the time they start having children, some of them won't be able to anymore by the time they want to, and others won't be able to have as many. So we'll really curtail the birth rate. And, if you are dealing with overpopulation, maybe that's a better way to do it than the one-child policy or some other ways that people have socially engineered. But the thing is, with social engineering, there are always going to be unintended effects. Whenever you're trying to decide for someone else that I'm going to look into your life, which is very intricate and complex, and I'm just going to nudge one variable because I see that as the variable that I should be manipulating. You don't know how many other systems are connected to that one variable. And when you do that across a population, you create all kinds of interesting and unforeseen downstream effects of your one manipulation.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the one-child policy, but also, and I had another thought. God, I lost it. The one-child policy, I mainly was teaching Chinese nationals, and it came up in class, this student was saying something about the one-child policy. I said, well, what's interesting is that it was forced on you, but propaganda convinced us to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And
propaganda.
Also just, this whole idea that your life isn't very fulfilled, unless you're doing more than creating a family. And what you were saying about being alone and isolated, I have to say, in my experience, and if I do write my dumb post-feminist life, I started writing a section of it. So we can take me to the age of 23. That period was so lonely and so upsetting, actually, when I look back on it and I see myself walking around, working in restaurants and meeting people in bars when they're not at their best. So my main socializing is with drunk, high, mean people, and sleeping off a night of, sleeping the day after a graveyard shift. waiting on drunk people, walking to and from work, not really connected to a community apart from the friends that I left back home in the suburbs who I was still seeing and who were getting married and doing all those things while I'm living in this apartment, going to a restaurant job. And really, honestly, the only socializing I'm doing is in the restaurant or in a bar, So if I have to choose between, say, the loneliness of raising kids, but then again, if we were all doing it at the same time, there would be more cohesion there. But we're alone now. You were doing something that other people weren't doing.
Yeah. And we kind of have to live from where we actually are, not from this ideal. So I can see the need. I can see one is too much, one is too little. There's an imbalance in both of those scenarios that you paint, but there's, maybe it's that ever striving for something better, which is what we do when we have these conversations too. I mean, we're talking about people striving for something better and then tipping that too far and falling into a new kind of chaos. And so then we strive for something better and we talk about how could we fix that and move it back towards something that's more of a balance point. But, in my life, I've been that stay-home mom that was achingly lonely. And I've been the single mom who worked and went to school full time and took her kids to all the sports and the choir and the this and the that and felt completely frazzled and exhausted at the end of the day. And I've also had the opportunity to be the mom of young babies who had a part-time job. And so, that was, for me, that's just my own anecdote, but that was a really nice balance. Getting out, being able to have intellectual discussions or talking about things that are beyond the little, when you have a brain that wants discovery, but it has very little new input and new stimulation, that can be torturous for some people. So getting out and being able to have discussions that go beyond just the diapers and the what's for dinner and the house decorating and the plants and the husband and, having these bigger, more worldly discussions, being in school, I see why people want that, men and women, why we want that kind of connection. And I don't think it's impossible to have both. I really don't think it's impossible to have both. It's impossible to have one if you fully go into the other and abandon the path of the other.
I'm actually wondering whether the best way to get both is to go back to forming families earlier, and everybody's doing it around the same age.
Yeah, so I think that there's something to that. And in order to do that, we really need educational standards that allow people to have meaningful work young. So we need high school to really mean something. We need people to be able to get good work and do good work at age 20. Yes. Not wait till they're 25 or 30 before they're considered an adult who can take responsibility. We need to actually have people assuming places of responsibility younger.
It's interesting. They basically go on to talk about their experiences and loneliness, right? And you had the one on the right who said, I was a stay-at-home mom with the kids. I felt incredibly lonely, not having an outlet, not really having a conversation, the ability to talk with adults. I felt incredibly lonely. And then you have this woman over here who in her young 20s was without a family, without kids, taking care of herself, doing night shifts, going in and waiting tables and basically serving drunks all the time. She said, she was like, you're serving people who are drunk and high and they're mean. And she said she felt incredibly lonely. And she was like, if I had to choose between the loneliness of raising kids within the context of a family and that season and changing diapers, and maybe your husband's gone for hours at a time because he's trying to pay bills and you guys are trying to get to a certain level, versus the loneliness of trying to survive on myself, I would rather the loneliness within the context of a family. So it's very, 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 very interesting dialogue. Very interesting dialogue. There's a little bit more, but I'm going to stop for now. I think there's still a lot to unpack here. But what I ultimately really appreciated about this conversation, the two different perspectives, but particularly the professor now who identifies as an ex-feminist after having lived life as a feminist, is the ability to look at things critically and say, maybe this whole fantasy, this whole dream that was sold to me wasn't necessarily the full reality. And what I'm hearing from both of these ladies is what I believe to be true, which is you're never really fully satisfied when you are living outside of God's design and purpose for you. And I think that the balancing act, I don't think is necessarily having the perfect policies as much. I mean, there's always room for better policies. There's always room for creating a better system. But I think ultimately it's like, if you're not grounded in what God has for you in a particular season and what you're meant to do, then you're never going to be satisfied. So, and this is my gripe sometimes with some of the different modern messaging, right? There's this idea of, okay, just go and do you, boo, right? Just seek the life that you want. Go pursue all of your dreams and go pursue everything that is out there for you. And again, there's nothing wrong with experiencing, exploring passions and desires and cultivating that. There's nothing wrong with that. But I believe a life that is lived outside of God and a life that is lived outside of God's divine or ultimate purpose, is always going to leave a gaping hole. Because if somebody is pursuing what they want, but it is disconnected from their actual purpose or what God has for them, then they're never going to fully be satisfied. Even if they're able to achieve the pinnacle of that, there's always going to be something that's missing, and there's always going to be the desire of I should have done that, I should have done this and that, because the flesh is never satisfied. That lower nature is there's always going to be that place of comparison. That's why I think finding contentment ultimately in God's purpose for you and being grounded in that is really what helps bring that balance. And then not getting caught up in a lot of this programming, because what this lady alluded to is programming, and how she did things, not even necessarily because it's what she felt in her heart she was supposed to do or even meant to do, but because she was programmed, and kid moms are saying, well, this is better, that lifestyle is better, that lifestyle is better. And not even finding contentment in where she was at in that journey. So really interesting. That's what I have for today. But you guys, be sure to like, share, subscribe if you found this interesting. Also, you can, support to the show. You can Cash App, Venmo, Shay Sade, PayPal if you like what we're doing, if you like what I'm about. Appreciate all of that. Also, you can sign up to be a channel member and get access to exclusive content. And yeah, you guys also send me over questions if you have any specific questions, because I am planning on interviewing this lady individually as I have more topics, and I think there's a lot more we can impact with respect to this conversation. So thank you so much for hanging out, guys, and we will talk later. Okay, bye.